Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking one of the absolute worst and, frankly, most mind-boggling environmental disasters in American history, the Dust Bowl. If you've ever wondered how a mix of human ambition and extreme weather can literally break a landscape, well, this is the story you absolutely need to know.
I want you to start by just picturing this. You step out onto your front porch in the middle of the afternoon. The sun should be beating down, right? But instead, you look up and the sky is pitch black. A massive, rolling dark cloud has completely swallowed the horizon. It sounds like a scene straight out of a sci-fi apocalypse movie. But for millions of Americans in the 1930s, this wasn't fiction. This terrifying scenario was just their everyday reality.
Let's look at how this all started in Section 1, The Promise of the Plains.
Back in the early 1930s, the Great Plains were the bustling heart of American agriculture. We're talking about a massive stretch of land hitting states like Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, Colorado, and New Mexico. Millions of people out there genuinely believed this incredibly rich farmland was their golden ticket. Farmers were working practically from sunrise to sunset, transforming the wild landscape into endless, golden fields of wheat. It was a completely grueling life, for sure, but man, it was fueled by so much hope. They looked out at those fields and saw total security for their families.
But here's the catch. For centuries, native grasses with these deep, complex root systems acted like a giant underground net, anchoring the fertile topsoil in place. But in the massive rush to plant more wheat, aggressive farming practices completely ripped up those native grasses. And without those vital roots holding everything together, the soil was left totally dry, incredibly loose and practically defenseless against the wind.
And that vulnerability became the fatal flaw, because then nature took a devastating turn. A severe, unrelenting drought settled across the entire region. We're talking month after grueling month with almost zero rain. Rivers shrank down to nothing. Those once endless, hopeful crops, they just withered and died right in the fields. The stage was perfectly set for disaster of unprecedented scale.
Which brings us to Section 2, the Black Blizzards.
Put yourself back in the boots of those farmers for a second. Your crops are dead, your land is baked dry, and you are desperate for relief. Then, one afternoon, you see it. A strange, massive dark cloud forming on the horizon, rolling fast toward your farm. Naturally, your first thought, your biggest hope, is that it's a massive rainstorm, finally arriving to save the day.
But as that ominous cloud got closer, the terrifying reality set in. It wasn't rain. There was no water in that cloud. It was dust. Those powerful winds had swept across the naked, parched plains and literally lifted millions of tons of dry topsoil straight up into the sky.
People quickly started calling these events black blizzards. And honestly, the name is spot on. These weren't just a face full of dirt on a windy day. We are talking about enormous, churning dust storms stretching for hundreds of miles. They were so incredibly dense that they blotted out the sun entirely, plunging bright afternoons into a sudden, suffocating darkness.
So, what was it actually like to live through that? Let's get into Section 3, a fight for survival. See, the dust didn't just stay outside. It was insidious. It pushed its way in the homes through shut windows and microscopic cracks in the walls. Families would wake up and find their beds, their food on the table, their clothes in the closet, all just coated in thick layers of dirt. Imagine trying to eat a meal and chewing on grit. It got so bad that desperate parents would actually place wet towels over their kids' faces at night, just trying to filter the air so they could safely breathe while they slept.
But despite those desperate measures, the human body just wasn't built to inhale that much particulate matter. Thousands fell victim to what they called dust pneumonia. It was a deadly respiratory illness caused directly by inhaling all that inescapable dirt right inside their own homes. The very air they needed to live was making them desperately sick.
And the devastation was absolute. Out in the fields, livestock died terrible deaths, suffocating from the dust or starving because there were no crops left to eat. With harvest after harvest failing, the land essentially died. Thousands upon thousands of farms, representing the life savings and literal blood, sweat, and tears of these families, suddenly became totally worthless. They had nothing left.
This kicks off Section 4, the Exodus West. With their land ruined and their livelihoods gone, a massive migration began. Entire communities just packed up whatever meager belongings they had left into beat-up old trucks and pointed them west. They were mostly heading for California, driven by the desperate hope that they could find some kind of agricultural work and maybe,
just maybe, scrape together a better life in a place where the sky wasn't literally falling on them.
But the dream rarely matched the reality awaiting them. They hoped for honest work and a fresh start. But the truth? When these exhausted families arrived out west, they collided with extreme poverty, rampant unemployment, and really severe discrimination. And remember, all of this was happening right in the middle of the Great Depression. Millions of Americans were already barely surviving. The Dust Bowl refugees were just pushed even deeper into a massive wave of national despair.
So how did this nightmare finally end? Let's talk about it in Section 5, Healing the Land.
The bleeding finally started to stop when the U.S. government stepped in and launched massive conservation programs. It was essentially a three-pronged attack. Step 1, they taught farmers entirely new agricultural methods to actually protect the topsoil. Step 2, they planted vast networks of trees to act as natural windbreaks. And Step 3, they introduced comprehensive land management practices across the entire Great Plains to make sure the earth would never be left this exposed and vulnerable again.
Let's pull back and look at the full timeline here. The aggressive farming in the 1920s stripped the land bare. Then the brutal drought of the early 30s baked it into dust. This peaked in the mid-30s with those terrifying black blizzards and the mass exodus west. But finally, by the late 30s, those new conservation programs started taking effect, and thankfully, the rains slowly returned. Piece by piece, the land recovered, and those shattered farming communities began the incredibly long, hard process of rebuilding.
Today, the Dust Bowl is the stark, unforgettable reminder of what happens when extreme weather collides with really short-sighted land management. It's proof that protecting the environment isn't just a nice idea, it's absolutely essential for the survival of future generations. Looking back at the pitch-black skies that swallowed the American plains, we really have to ask ourselves, are we actually applying the lessons of the Dust Bowl today, or are we setting ourselves up for another black blizzard in the future? Think about that for a second. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.